Welcome to the Nurturing Fathers Podcast, a show dedicated to helping men succeed at the most challenging and rewarding job they'll ever have, being a dad. Your hosts are Mark Perlman, the creator and founder of the Nurturing Fathers program, and his son, Corey Perlman, who facilitates the program at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary and is also a father of 2 young children. It's time to add tools to your Nurturing Fathers toolbox. Mark and Corey, take it away.
All right. Well, welcome back to episode 3 of the Nurturing Fathers program. We are just flying through this.
On a roll, man. Yeah, we're on a roll.
Man. Well, this one, I don't know, Dad. This is going to be a tough one for me. Men and feelings. Oh boy, I'm going to lose all my rep with all my boys and such. But let's talk about men and feelings, because it doesn't get talked about all that much. You know, we like to bottle up our feelings and all that kind of thing. And this is that constant generalization thing about men, and that we just we have 2 feelings, basically, excitement and anger.
And therein lies
the problem. So, Dad, what is the issue around men and feelings?
To the best of my awareness, and using myself as an example, we're taught from a very early age to bottle up our feelings and deny them. Now, I grew up in the Bronx, so let me tell you kind of how that learning takes place. In my family, they didn't deal with feelings. They dealt with health issues immediately.
Right.
Anything you weren't feeling, if you sneezed, if you had a pimple on, they jumped on that. Feelings, not so much at all. They just were shy and uncomfortable with them. But in the Bronx, the guys I hung with from the age of 6 years old to 16, certainly, you were not allowed to express certain feelings in that group, on the basketball court, in the park, wherever we were. And if you did, if you should happen to cry or whatever, you were basically chastised for it, and you're probably given a label that lasted you for your entire life.
Wow.
They talk about that label at your funeral. So it was very clear. So I learned to push my feelings down, to separate myself, to the point that my wife, your mother, would ask me, or my current wife would say, "What are you feeling?" I would be able to say, well, there's something kind of tickling me in there. There's something twiggling around, but I could not put a label on it. I could identify it. It took me years of paying attention to be able to say, I think I'm feeling anxious, or I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling fearful. So I got so far away from my feelings, I couldn't even call them by name. So it's a cultural thing, but more specifically, not just that we don't do with feelings, because like you said, excitement is not a problem. We yell and scream at football games and stuff, not a problem. What are a problem are the so-called feminine or vulnerable feelings, primarily being afraid, not knowing, being sad. Being afraid, being sad. Those we're taught not to let out. So they're pushed down, pushed down, pushed down. And that's what we need to talk about during this podcast. What is that about? It's not a moral issue. You don't have to express your feelings. It's a practical issue. How is it working? How is it working? How is it working for your physical health, your mental health, your relational health? What are the results for your kids? For men who just don't or can't express their feelings?
Well, one of the things that I've come through on this one a lot in the program has helped me on this one a lot, because I'm challenged with this one. You know, Jess will tell you, and I don't do it for manly reasons. It just seems to be some sort of faucet that's turned up. And I'm not sure she's ever seen me cry before. And I'm not saying that as I'm macho. I feel it. I mean, I can feel it coming on, but for whatever reason, there's things inside my body that pushes it back down. And I liken that maybe a little bit to Mom's passing, and that somehow I don't know. I got some things to work on in myself. But, I made the joke to you before that, this is where the whole women are from Venus, but men are from Mars, or whatever, that whole thing. We're just so different. When it comes to this, I would come into this saying, well, hey, Dad, we're different. We feel a different way, and women feel a different way, and we kind of suppress certain feelings. And that's just the way we are. That's the way we'll always be. And I came into it kind of thinking to myself, so what? Why is it not such a good thing that we have a tough time feeling those emotions that you just talked about?
Well, you've mentioned marriage and relationships, and that's one of the arenas I think this comes up. If you're living by yourself as a bachelor, without kids, without wife, you may not bump up against this too much, and you might be just okay. Although I got some things to say about that as well. But if you're in relationship, I can't tell you how many times your mom or my wife, Kate, now has said, Mark, what are you feeling? Mark, what are you feeling? And I say to Kate, why is that important to you? Why are you so interested in that? Why do we keep coming back? And she'll say something like, because I want to know who you are. We signed on to be as open and available, know as much about each other as possible. There's a whole arena of who you are that's not available because I'm not showing it. My sadness, my fears, my thoughts, my doubts. And it's part of the male image. It feels to us men, or we're taught to feel like we are possibly weak or too feminine when we express these feelings, to the point that our masculine self-image feels like it's taken a hit. And that's for most. I'm not sure that's what your issue is, because you mentioned divorce and other things. So there are many avenues to this. But as a culture, we as men in America do not share these vulnerable feelings easily. And you've got to take it on to learn how to do it. So for the sake of relationships, I would say it's extremely important, with our spouses especially. But I think it's more than that, because what I have learned is that feelings are just natural pockets of energy that come up in circumstances and tend to want to come out.
Mm-hmm.
That's the natural flow. If somebody falls on the street, you got certain reactions. Oh my God, if a child is hurt and crying, if a child is seriously sick, if someone close to you is lost, these feelings come out, up, and naturally want to come out. That's their natural flow. So it takes effort and energy to keep them packed down. And I think what happens with that effort and energy is, not only do we get removed from those feelings and lose access, but that energy finds its way out in other arenas. One, in our physical bodies, which may not be so good for our physical health, whether it's ulcers or whatever, who knows what. But the other way is that the channel that is open for men, whereas these vulnerable feelings are closed, the channel of anger is open. So if the channel is anger is opened, might it be possible that a lot of these packed down vulnerable feelings come out as anger? And I hear men say all the time, I'm angry, I'm angry, I'm angry. When I did counseling with men early in my career, just for a short time, I found men came in with certain situations that they were broken. Either a child died, or a divorce happened, or a job was lost. However they were trying to manage their feeling world was not working. And they were really in distress. First 2 or 3 sessions, anger, 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 anger. And then once that was kind of peeled away, tremendous reservoir of hurt and vulnerability and grief.
All bottled up.
All bottled up. And that started coming out. And that was very important at that point.
In the Nurturing Fathers program, during this session, we chart feelings between men and women. It's hilarious, by the way. I never see the men get so, have so much fun than when they see the discrepancies between men and women, them and their significant others, when it comes to feelings, and you just see it. But what I show them, and you do such a great job with this description, this analogy of, as we push down those emotions that you just talked about, hurt, sadness, jealousy, things of that nature, it has to come out somewhere. And it just starts to boil up. You think about the appliance or whatever the thing is. It was
Pressure cooker.
And then, and so I couldn't think of it. Yeah, clearly I don't cook that much. But you think about, the men that are in there, this is when it gets like profound. It's not just men in prison though, it's all of us. But, what caused them to be in there, right? Or what caused this terrible thing that they regret so much oftentimes lies in that pressure cooker that just went off, right? And we lose our emotions. Right. And it's because we weren't able to express. So I use this analogy with the guys, Dad, that after we get kind of through that is, you're at a party. And this happened with me one time with my wife a long time ago. And she was talking to another guy. I didn't like that. Mm-hmm. That pissed me off. Mm-hmm. But really deep down inside, I was jealous. So I told the guys, there's 2 ways this conversation could go. We're driving home. Honey, I got to tell you, we've been married for 3 years. And I saw you talking to that guy. And I know it was nothing, but man, it made me feel jealous. I had these emotions come up that made me fear losing you. It was really scary.
And that's a vulnerable way of saying it. That's a real way of saying it.
So her reaction would be, I'd probably get some that night. I mean, I think that conversation would go really well. The alternative, and probably the way it did happen, was, what the fuck you do? I can't believe you did this. And I'm screaming and yelling, and you didn't see me over there. And how do you think that went?
Not vulnerable. Very different outcome.
Yeah. How do you think she responds to you? And I tell the guys, how many times have you had that reaction? And she immediately goes back. Of course she does. She's going to be right on the defensive because you're pouring out all this toxic energy. But if you just tune into the emotion that you're feeling, she might be more open to saying, wow, I didn't realize that. I'm so sorry.
Right.
you know?
Right. I was one of those guys who had more access to anger. Most men do. It's very rare that a man doesn't. This conditioning is so successful in our culture that it's astounding. We should package it and figure out how it works because, my God, I'll give you just an example. We used to do these groups in schools with kids who were grieving. And there was this one boy in this group. He was about 10 or 11 years old, and his father and mother got divorced. He was very close to his father. He was very sad. Then his father was a long distance trucker and got killed in an auto accident. So he's sitting there, and we're talking about feelings. We're talking about sadness. So I say to him when he tells the story, well, how'd you feel? I feel angry, he says. I feel angry. I feel angry that this happened. It should happen to me. And then I said, any other feeling? And I watched him kind of check inside and then come out and say, no. That's it. Because he was at that point, just as preteen, where that was no longer acceptable. The other girls, the younger kids, all cry together, even at each other's stories.
He turned it off.
But he learned to turn it off. Yeah. And we all do that. So I think basically, in my experience with this, the degree to which I'm able to access those more vulnerable feelings, and I have actually made it a practice for myself because I felt it was important for me to know and learn those parts of myself, and then also important for my relationships. As the more vulnerable feelings have come out more, the anger has naturally come down more. And I'm just not as angry a person or as quick to anger. And let me give you a couple of very simple examples of how I've done that. I allow myself sometimes to get teary at a movie or a song. And sometimes I'll put that song on intentionally to feel a little bit of sadness. Just go to that place, listen to Leonard Cohen.
Practicing that emotion.
Practicing that emotion and allowing it. When your grandmother, my mother, was dying, and when you know how close I was to her, every trip back from Fort Lauderdale, a 4-hour trip, I would not put the radio on. I would allow myself to feel what I was feeling and often cry during that trip. That went on for weeks and months, but it was so cleansing and it was so intimate and close to her and that experience. So I literally allowed myself to practice it. And our wives or the women in our lives are not only supporters, but they can be kind of teachers and helpers on this path because they are more familiar with it.
So Dad, let's talk a little bit about with the kids, you know, and with their emotions. And obviously with girls and boys, it's a little bit different, especially with boys. I'm really careful with Milo and how I try to control his feelings. Don't cry, son. You know, don't cry, Milo. Don't cry, Milo. There's no need, you know, it's like a common thing us dads kind of want to do is just jump in and say, don't cry. Well, wait a minute. Is that the appropriate response? Should he be crying? You know, yeah. I mean, he just skinned his knee or he just got his favorite toy taken away. It was something that really upset him. And why am I, you know, sort of pushing him into this feeling of something else? And my son, Milo, as you know, really does already have some issues with anger. You know, and so what I need to help him work through as his dad is to give him this array of emotions. And then one of the things you say in the Nurturing Fathers Program I love so much is, you know, God gave us and women all the emotions. He didn't say, okay, women, you guys get all these, and guys, you're just going to get these. He gave us all the same ones. We just chose not to use certain ones.
It's a cultural artifact. It's a cultural stereotype, if you will, that men don't cry. Real men don't cry. Where that came from, not sure. If you're fighting a war, maybe. I don't know. But in regular life, so the question really is, how does it work? That's the key question. How does it work? It's not a moral question. It's not a judgment. It's not pointing fingers. What I felt for myself is it wasn't working real well for me. I had too much anger, and I felt that anger was in proportion to the feelings I wasn't expressing. Now, if I got a lifetime of those, who knows where that anger is going to go? Like you were saying before, it gets really dysfunctional. All of a sudden, I'm an angry husband. I'm an angry father. I'm angry at work. So we need to access those other emotions, I think, for our physical health, our emotional health, our relational health. All those things improve as we have better access to these vulnerable feelings. The alternative to the child when he falls is just to give him a big hug and say, it's okay, baby, you'll be all right. Fix the bandage and move on. Kids cry. One of the ways kids express themselves is crying. There are no cry babies. They may twist it or they may be taught to twist it and use it as a tool. It's a whole different thing, tantrums and stuff. But normally, kids cry as a way of expressing themselves. People who get hurt, physically hurt, may tend to cry. People who've lost another person, get emotionally hurt, tend to cry. It is a natural human response to certain realities.
One of the things that the Nurturing Fathers Program has really helped me with as a dad is helping my kids, mostly with Milo, because Talia kind of tended to do it as a girl on her own, is labeling his emotions. So, he's frustrated. That there's a really good distinction between angry and frustrated. Those are different. They're
Right.
different emotions. And he should understand what the difference is, And so, Milo, you're frustrated right now, aren't you? Yes, Daddy, I am frustrated. Or you're sad. Why are you sad? Because my friends won't play with me. You're not angry. I mean, it could turn into anger, but right now you're just sad. And it's okay to feel that emotion right there, and all the other ones. So just helping them label the feelings has
Huge.
been
Yeah.
profound for me. And that came from the program.
Yeah. And I think it relaxes them in the conversation when they label it and talk about it. And then there are things that maybe they can problem solve and do about it. So it's much more constructive. So I'm a feeling-based person. So let me just say this for a start. Growing up in New York City and the Bronx, being a teenager as a male who was a feeling-based person, I felt I had to hide a lot of who I was by my feelings. I relate to the world through feelings. All these personality tests says, Mark, you're a feeling-based person. I had to hide it. But then I discovered I don't want to hide it anymore. I hid it so much I had no access to it. So here are some examples and ways that I talk about in Nurturing Fathers program where I have explored accessing my feelings. One situation would be, I'll give you a situation, Corey, between you and I. We talked about that divorce before. Divorce is one of the most painful, difficult events in a person's life. It involves sadness. It involves anger. It involves loss. It involves a tremendous number of emotions. So Corey and I, the son I'm sitting here with now, he was 7 years old. We had a routine of going out on Fridays, my time with him in the evenings, go to McDonald's, get something to eat, play some games there at the mall, come back, watch TV, maybe play that quarter game, throwing it in the cup and stuff. And we did this for weeks, and we may have done this for months. And it's typical father-son activity, but also divorce activity. What we didn't do was talk about the divorce. Okay, so one Friday night, we're sitting there, and do you want to put the TV on? Corey says, no. I said, do you want to go get something to eat? Are you hungry? Corey says, no. This is strange. So I say, what's going on? He said, I don't know. So he's sitting there, and I said, hey, what's going on? And he puts his head on my shoulder, and he starts to cry. So I'm sitting there now as the father, just recently divorced from his mom, and saying, well, I feel like crying with him. This is shared sadness, but I don't want to damage him. This is where my thoughts are going. I don't want to make him think I'm a wimp. What's best for him? What's best for me? There's no easy answer. You take your best shot. But since I'm trying to be real with my feelings, I put my head on his head, and we both cried for a few minutes. Just sat there, not too long. Okay, we're both done. He takes a deep breath. I said, well, you want to talk about this? Thinking there's some deep stuff. And no, I want to go out to eat. I'm hungry. So we then did our mall routine. But that was a moment where we were real together. And you know what's interesting about that? Instead of damaging Corey or traumatizing him in some way, Corey took the opportunity to tell that story to other people in different situations as a kind of peak moment or a meaningful moment that we were real together as father and son. So he has told that story in different contexts, which has always been interesting to me.
Yeah, you gave me an opening, a comfort level as a 7-year-old to express my feelings. And at that moment, that's what I needed to do. And you let it happen. There was a really opportunity there, for a typical dad to kind of force that down. And boy, what wouldn't that
Or
have
judge you for it.
Yeah.
That was the last thing you needed.
Or just not to even pick on dads too much. A natural reaction of just the uncomfortable with this. It's okay, and just stopping it, just like, no, it's, and then trying to fix it, right? So we'll talk about this a lot throughout this program is we're fixers. We try to fix it. So sometimes we don't need fixing.
The feelings really don't need fixing.
Yeah.
That's true. One more example is near and dear to my heart. When my father passed, and he was very close to me, and he was a nurturing man, actually, my father. I was asked as the oldest son to give his eulogy. Many of you hearing this podcast will be asked to do that for a son or a father or a mother or a friend. It's an honor, and it's also difficult. So I wrote my best stuff, and I come to the synagogue, and there are my sons sitting in the front row, and my mom, his wife. There are family right behind him, and then there's a whole bunch of his friends, women and men from a lifetime. So I step up to the microphone, and I've got my words, and I'm prepared to do this. And all of a sudden, something comes up in my throat where I can't speak because my eyes are going to explode. I was overwhelmed by grief and sadness. And what do? I don't want to be a wimping crybaby here. I need to do this. So again, you take your best shots. So I take a step back from the microphone. I take a deep breath, a couple of deep breaths. I feel myself settling down a bit, walk back to the microphone. The words were able to come. So I went through this and I said what I had to say, and I'm all done and the ceremony is over. And you know who came up to me and spoke? His friends, his male friends, in large numbers. Mark, how beautiful, how much you love your father. What a tribute. And I'm saying to myself, "Geez, I'm crying, you know." And I said, "Thank you. And why do you feel so much that way?" And they said, "Because when you took that step back and you showed us how much you felt, you gave us all permission to show how much we felt."
Mhm.
So that instead of being this catastrophic thing that I thought people would be criticizing me for, they all appreciated it. It was a totally different experience.
Mm.
So in generally speaking, Corey, I find that my ability to show emotion has brought people closer to me instead of the fear factor of alienating or being judged for it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's profound in itself, and I think that in addition to that, what's so profound about men and emotions is a big part of why we suffer and we make mistakes is because we let our anger take control of us. And so, Dad, this is a practical, tactical program. What are some ways that we as dads can help our children, especially our sons, to feel the array of emotions and to be able to keep our anger essentially in check, meaning that it's at the same level as the other emotions. Yes, there's a time for anger. There's definitely a time for anger. But if the other ones are suppressed, it can get out of control. And so I'll start it, Dad, and I'm interested in your perspective, but the program's helped me do this. One of the ways that I try to help Milo channel his anger is to express it in ways that aren't harmful to other people. So when he's frustrated, he can go and be in his frustrated corner, or he can scream into a pillow, or he can do some things to start channeling some of that energy towards something that's safe to do that in, right? So to actually help our kids practice their emotions will serve them, a lifetime, right?
I think you're right. And they won't have to repeat the same issue we have of freezing our feelings and losing touch with them. I think the basic strategy that you just laid out to put a label on your son or daughter's emotions, sweetheart, you seem worried now. You seem a little afraid of this. We're going to cross this stream on the log. You want to hold daddy's hand, or would you think maybe you just don't want to do those conversations, to label it, let them get their feelings out in words instead of just actions or anger. But one of the things that allows us to do that is our ability to deal with our own emotions. The limiting factor, if I'm the father who will not cry because my masculinity is at stake, I don't really want my son to cry then. I'm going to react a certain way. But once I can deal with that value or prejudice, then the work on the father, and Nurturing Fathers is a father development program. We're not so much working on the kids. We're working with the father to be the environment that these kids can be nurtured and thrive in. And one of the ways on this feeling level was we need to work on ourselves and our feelings. That's much harder than working on our kids. So when I am feeling sad next time, and if I don't even want to do it in front of my wife because there's still that embarrassment feel, go off by myself. Be with those feelings a little while. Put a sad song on. Think about something. Go to see a sad movie with your wife and allow yourself. It's the intention and will with these feelings to invite them. You can't force them. You can't snap your fingers and change what's being patterned for a lifetime, but you can invite them. It's a slow and gradual process. It is a warrior's journey or a hero's journey in that it is really fighting demons that are the hardest to fight, not out there, but within ourselves. But it's a gentle process of inviting. And that's what it's been for me. It takes a while. I'm not great at it yet, but I am better than I was. And I do feel the benefits. I feel fuller as a man and a person for being able to do that. I know my relationship with my wife is better for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell these stories whenever I can to other people, not to moralize, but just to give men information that don't believe these catastrophic expectations that things are going to turn out terrible when you shed a tear or you talk about them. More often they don't. People react really warmly to it.
Yeah, and I think, just some tactical things that I've been working on, not only on myself, but also, again, with Milo, who has, shown me that some anger things have been coming out a lot recently is, getting down on his level, which we talk about a lot, is getting on my knees, looking him in the eye and saying, how are you feeling? Just asking that question, just how are you feeling? Just, I think, trains them to be able to look inside and try to name that emotion.
So you're building a skill there.
Yeah. Help them do that. And then the other thing that you mentioned, which I think is equally important, is after they share that emotion, don't try to suppress it. Don't try to disagree with it. Let it happen. I'm sorry. Empathize with it. I'm sorry you're feeling frustrated, man. I know you're sad, buddy. I know, and give them a hug, whatever the case may be. And don't be so quick to fix.
Right.
which is kind of what we're trying to. Sometimes it's best, like you did with me, just to give him a hug or give him that shoulder and let him cry, let him know it's okay.
Yeah. I'll give you another example. If you've got like a young teenage daughter in middle school and she says, beginning of school year, and I've got this new friend who's a male sits behind me, and his first dance is coming up, and he and I got real friendly. I think he's going to invite me, but it's only a day before and I haven't heard from him yet. And Dad, instead of coming up with a fix or doing something, he says to her, "Hey, sweetie, I think you feel a little concerned that maybe this guy that you really like is not going to ask you to the dance." And she thinks that, "Dad, you're a mind reader, man. You understand me so deeply. All I did was paraphrase those words and validate her feelings." And to her, it's like, wow, Dad is just really, really there.
You just hit on something. You said validate their feelings.
Yeah.
I think that's a key takeaway. Validate their feelings.
And we, as adults, are in the position to label them. And sometimes they'll say, no, that's not it. So we maybe try again, where they're learning to do that. So we are teaching a skill. Yeah. And we're going to give them perhaps a better way in the world with feelings than perhaps we were trained for.
So as we kind of wrap this episode up, everybody, just be on the lookout of those in the Nurturing Fathers program. And by the way, there's a self-instruction journal on your website, nurturingfathers.com. If you guys want to look at some of the things that you hear us mentioning in here, there's programs that are popping up all over the country and the world. If you want to get into one, which we'll talk about more in a different case, but there's an array of emotions that you all know, and they're in the Nurturing Fathers program, and they're way beyond just anger and excitement. You know, they're jealousy and sadness and joy and excitement and all kinds of different ones. And I think that the point of all this is helping us first, as you mentioned, Dad, as well as our kids, to know that we have all of those emotions to be able to use at our disposal, and that we have to be careful, because if we're not thinking about it enough and we are able to be triggered by anger, if we don't allow those other emotions to come in, the anger bubble can burst and bad things happen.
Right. And I'm thinking, Corey, the chapter in the book's called The World of Feelings. And it's because it is another world. It's a beautiful world. Feelings connect us to ourselves, to other people, and to what's going on in the world. And it's a powerful way that we humans are able to connect, because what follows our access to feelings is empathy and compassion. But when we feel something for something else, we then can empathize with it and have compassion for it. And as a father or mother, having compassion and empathy for our children is golden. Real important.
All right. Well, that's a wrap on session 3 podcast, Nurturing Fathers program.
Thanks for listening to the Nurturing Fathers podcast. Have questions or comments? Join the conversation at facebook.com/nurturingfathers or email us at nurturingfathers@gmail.com.